This is a video tutorial on constructing a perspective grid. Oftentimes, you can sketch without a grid, uh, but if you want to be more precise, sometimes it helps to have a grid to locate various objects, and it's suited more for interiors. So let's get started. Okay, what I've done is construct a rectangle representing the size of a room, not a floor plan. We're not looking down on the room. This would be like looking at one of the walls. And we're going to create a grid that looks something like this. So this rectangle here represents the wall that would be closest to you. We'll get rid of that, but here would be the back wall. This is what we end up with. That would be the back wall. And here are the side walls right here. Here's the floor. So this is what we'll end up with. Now, when you use the grid, you could get rid of this line, but that's what we need to start with. So this area right here, this wall that's kind of transparent would be the same size as this back wall. Okay. So I've got it at let's see, this would represent maybe a 12-foot by 12 by 12 room, something like that, with an 8-foot ceiling. So this, I don't need to know any perspective. This is just the size of the wall that you could measure or estimate. I put an eye level in, which is the horizon line. This would be at about 6 feet. Now on that horizon line, move this over so you can see this. On that horizon line, take half the distance of the room or half the width of the room from the center. Now I put my vanishing point right in the center of the room, so that would be the midpoint of the room. I take this distance and measure it over here. So I think this is 6 inches. I just measured over 3 inches. So this is 1/2 the size of the room from the edge of the wall, or the edge to right here on the horizon line or the eye level. Okay, you need that point. Now I'm going to use a ruler just so I can be a little more precise, but oftentimes I'll sketch out a perspective grid freehand just so that I can have something to go by. Okay, on the bottom representing the floor, I've got 6 inches. So just to make this a little more clear for everybody, I'm going to use 1.5 inch divisions, which would represent, a certain distance, just to have something to go by to keep it simple for you. You may want to figure out a scale where your divisions would be 1 foot. I'm just doing it this way to make it more clear without a whole bunch of lines. So I divided this floor into 4 equal parts. Found the center, and then found the center of that. Okay. So this is actually pretty simple. And this is a method that was invented back in the Renaissance. Several people used it. Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Brunelleschi, all Italians, of course. Anyway, so take this. This is called the diagonal vanishing point, and you'll see why in a second. I'm going to draw light lines through each of those points. I'm going to make these a little darker so that you can see them. Yeah, you can see it all right. Each of those points that you marked out on the floor line from that diagonal vanishing point. Okay. Now, going from each of these 4 corners, you're going to have the corners of the room going toward the vanishing point. Where that hits right there would be the beginning of the back wall. So I went from here toward the vanishing point. Where it hits the line that goes to this one out here, that becomes the back wall. So let me draw the back wall in, just so we can start to visualize how this looks. Then I go up. I'm just making these parallel. Now this would locate This is the juncture of the ceiling and the wall. Once I draw this ruler away, you'll see it. And that should line up right there, and it does. Close enough. So what I did was connect from the diagonal vanishing point to each of these 4 points. I drew this corner line to the vanishing point, and where those two meet, where this line and this line meet, that gives me that point. Once I have that point, I can go on around and locate that back wall. So now so these are the points that I'm interested in right here. Can you see those? Can you see how they get smaller as it recedes in the distance? So this is the horizontal portion of the grid. I'm going to draw this in darker now. Now, if you're doing a sketch in perspective using a grid, you wouldn't make your lines this dark because they're too hard to erase, but I'm making them dark so that you can see them. Or you could use this as an underlay on a tracing. I use that often. I'll have a grid underneath that I can just use as a guide to sketch with. So see what I did? I had those points, and I just went parallel to the wall, straight across. Now from these intersections, I don't even need to go by that, but see these points right here, there, and there? Well, those should line up. If you did this very accurately, they'll line up with the vanishing point, okay? But I don't need to worry about that because I've got these points out here that will all go back to the vanishing point. I'll draw that in dark. So there is the grid. Okay. Whatever this unit is, this will be a square. So these represent perfect squares. Whatever distance you had. Now, I talked about the diagonal vanishing point. See these lines right here? Aren't those diagonals within those squares? And because those diagonals are parallel in reality, they go to a vanishing point, which happens to be right here. This works out. I gave you that distance of 1/2 the size of the room. That's a pretty good measure. I've experimented with this. And if you go out too far out away from it, the room starts getting really distorted. If you're too close, it's distorted in the other direction. So that would be your interior grid, this being the back wall right here. Darken that in. And again, you could erase these sidelines and just kind of have, usually in a sketch, you'll have it fade out. So it may look more like this, where it's just kind of fading out. But at least you have something to start with. You don't have to draw this line in here. You could draw that in very lightly and then erase it. And maybe the grid just kind of ends up in here someplace. Okay. So it doesn't have to be bounded by these lines. That would look kind of funky like that. You'd never see a room look like that. You don't see a frame around it. So I would advise when you're done, of course, if you're using this as an underlay under a sketch or under a sheet of paper, let me see if you can see that. And you can kind of see it. Let's see if I've got another sheet that we can use. Here we go. Here's a sheet of tracing paper. So now I could use that as my, I could start to sketch. Say here's a sofa. And I've got that underlying grid with the vanishing point. And see, I can use those grid lines for distances if I know what those are. So if this is going to be a sofa, it's just a rough. Just kind of roughing it in. Okay, you get the idea. So I wouldn't have these grid lines on my sketch. So this is a great idea. Just use that as an underlying, and then I can put in, I can sketch in the walls. Even though I did the grid with a ruler, my sketch then is freehand and it has a nice accurate but sketchy look to it. And maybe there's a table right here. See, I'm using the vanishing point. I'm establishing. What I like to do, and I've said it in classes, is draw the footprint of the object. That locates it in relation to something else. And then go straight up from there with these verticals. So here would be the tabletop would be right about in here. And I'm using the grid only as a guide. Okay, I think that kind of explains it. A little bit of the wall in here. I like to put a picture in the room. Vanishing point. Something abstract. Okay, so when I take that away from the grid, I've got a neat little sketch. It's fairly accurate because I've got the grid underneath. Okay, that ought to about do it. I hope this helps, and keep sketching.